The Ku Klux Klan is America's most notorious white supremacist group. Dressed in white hoods and robes, they spread fear through violence and terror.
Klansmen for Mississippi!
Mississippi!
Klansmen for America!
For America!
But not everyone who joined the Ku Klux Klan stayed with it forever, especially not Dennis Michael McGiffen. He thought the club was not radical enough. He joined the Klan in the early 2000s and rose through the ranks, becoming a Grand Dragon, a senior official within the Ku Klux Klan. He wanted to create something that fulfills his desires of extreme radicalism. At first, Dennis believed in what the group stood for, but over time, he grew frustrated. In his eyes, they weren't doing enough, so he did what a rebel would do. He left. McGiffen walked away from the Ku Klux Klan disappointed. He believed they talked big but didn't do enough. McGiffen's hopes were high, so instead of giving up, he built something new. In 1998, alongside a group of former Klan members and white supremacists, he formed a group and gave it a name pulled straight from a violent neo-Nazi novel, The New Order, a tribute to Bob Matthews and the terror group described in the Turner Diaries. They weren't interested in rallies or speeches. They wanted action. Dennis McGiffen had been part of hate groups for a long time. He had ties to the Ku Klux Klan in Illinois and a group called Aryan Nations. By the mid-1990s, he started looking for people who felt the same way he did. He found men who were tired of waiting and wanted to do something. One of them was Wallace Scott Wykerding, a former prison guard who got fired for giving KKK flyers to inmates. Others included Daniel Rick, Ralph P. Bach, Glenn Lavelle Loutharp, and Carl C. Shave. Most of them didn't have violent records, but they all believed in white supremacist ideas, and they believed the time for action had come. By 1997, the group was deep into plotting violence. They talked about turning legal weapons into machine guns, robbing banks, and launching coordinated attacks. Their targets: civil rights groups, Jewish organizations, even city water supplies, all part of a larger plan to spread fear, spark chaos, and fund their movement. Some plots were so extreme they didn't even seem real, but the weapons, maps, and materials they gathered told a different story. But in early 1998, everything fell apart. The FBI raided the group's hideout and found guns, bombs, poison, and maps. Proof they weren't just talking. They were ready to strike. It all started when a former member turned informant provided the FBI with recordings that exposed the full extent of their plans. That's when the world first heard the name Dennis McGiffen. He was arrested, charged with federal weapons violations, and later sentenced to 7 years in prison. The defense argued it was all just talk, but the evidence said otherwise. He finished his sentence in 2004, but he wasn't done. Behind bars, Dennis McGiffen had studied the culture of motorcycle clubs, the power, the loyalty, the image. People respected them. So when he got out in 2010, he didn't return to white robes and backroom meetings. He put on a vest and started something new. McGiffen founded a motorcycle club and named it Sadistic Souls Motorcycle Club, a white supremacist gang disguised as a biker brotherhood. Their colors were black and silver. Their motto was the Black and Silver Solution. Soon, that phrase showed up everywhere, on hate websites, in prisons, and at secret gatherings. On their website, they said forced integration was genocide. They claimed the white race was being erased. By 2010, Dennis McGiffen had rebuilt himself. He had established the Sadistic Souls MC, and it had members across various states. The Sadistic Souls were growing. They had members across several states, but McGiffen didn't just want attention, he wanted fear. He needed something stronger, something with roots in the white supremacist world. That's when he looked to Aryan Nations. Aryan Nations started in the 1970s. It was founded by Richard Butler, a former aerospace engineer who preached that white Christians were the only true Americans. According to him, everyone else, Jews, black people, and immigrants, didn't belong. Under Butler, Aryan Nations became a gathering point for hate. Neo-Nazis, skinheads, and former Klan members trained on their land in northern Idaho. The group ran armed patrols, held military drills, and hosted yearly events where hate groups from across the country came together. Butler preached about a coming race war and used his group to spread fear and violence. They handed out propaganda, plotted attacks, and built alliances with other white supremacist movements. For a time, Aryan Nations was one of the most powerful and feared hate groups in America. They had a compound in northern Idaho where members trained with guns, marched in uniform, and held rallies filled with Nazi flags and fiery sermons. It looked like a church, but it functioned more like a paramilitary camp. But power fades, and so did they. As the years passed, cracks started to show. Members turned violent, even against police. The group drew national headlines for hate crimes. Eventually, their compound was raided. A major lawsuit by the Southern Poverty Law Center nearly bankrupted them. The fall was steep. Their founder, Richard Butler, died in 2004. With him, most of Aryan Nations' influence disappeared. But the ideas didn't die. They just moved into new names, new leaders, and new strategies. After Butler's death, the movement splintered. There was no clear successor, so different groups stepped up and claimed they were the true Aryan Nations. One of those factions rose in Louisiana, led by Maurice Glette. Glette wasn't a preacher. He wasn't a soldier. He was a career criminal, with a long record and deep roots in the white power movement. His rap sheet said it all: shoplifting, drug possession, aggravated assault. He was even involved in a bank robbery plot. In 1997, he rammed a police car in Ohio, leading to another arrest and another prison stint. But in extremist circles, that kind of record only added to his reputation. By the time he was released from federal prison in August 2010, Glette was ready to reclaim power. He quickly declared his faction the true Aryan Nations and began rebuilding. He launched weekly sermons online called Sword of the Truth, preaching a violently racist version of Christian identity theology. He also adopted the title Senior Pastor of the Church of Jesus Christ Christian, reviving the religious front that Richard Butler had once used to give Aryan Nations legitimacy. Gullette's claims were big. He called his group the most feared and revered white supremacist organization the world has ever known, and the fastest-growing pro-white Christian organization in the world. But the truth? His chapter was small with few aging members. There was no real momentum. Still, Glette wore Richard Butler's legacy like a badge. His faction may have been fading, but Glette still had something valuable: the Aryan Nations name. And that's exactly when Dennis McGiffen came into the picture. Glette saw an opportunity to revive his version of the Aryan Nations by teaming up with McGiffen. And McGiffen, he saw something too: the missing racial spark. He needed to take his biker club even further. Therefore, the two merged under a new banner: the Sadistic Souls Aryan Nations Motorcycle Club. It still looked like an MC on the outside, with black and silver vests, patches, and bikes. But the message had shifted. They called themselves Christian bikers, but their version of Christianity was rooted in racism and violence. They preached separation, warned of war, and blamed others for the problems they created. Each man got what he needed. McGiffen gained a legacy. Glette gained life. Together, they transformed a fading hate group and a rising outlaw club into a thriving institute. Initially, the alliance appeared unstoppable. The newly merged Sadistic Souls Aryan Nations MC began spreading fast. Chapters popped up across the Midwest and the South. Members from other white supremacist groups started paying attention. On the surface, it looked like the far right had found its next rising powerhouse, a perfect blend of old-school hate and modern outlaw energy. But behind closed doors, the cracks were already showing. 2 leaders, 2 egos, 1 throne. Dennis McGiffen and Maurice Glette were never built to share power. McGiffen came from the biker world, harsh, aggressive, and fueled by image. He wore leather, flashed middle fingers, and built his club like a street gang with patches. Glette, on the other hand, came from the old guard of Aryan Nations. He believed in structure, Christian identity theology, and white nationalist order. In his eyes, the Sadistic Souls were reckless, more interested in being seen than in building a true racial movement. It didn't take long for things to explode. Glette began accusing McGiffen's members of race mixing. He claimed some were involved in relationships with non-white partners. For a movement obsessed with racial purity, that was the ultimate betrayal. He didn't keep it private either. Glette aired the accusations online and in private emails. He said the Sadistic Souls were drunks and degenerates, calling them more of a photo club than a brotherhood. The final blow came when he said they had no place under the Aryan Nations banner. McGiffen fired back hard. He went public with his own attack, calling Glette a welfare king and a costume Nazi. He photoshopped Glette into an obscene meme, mocking him for being out of shape, out of touch, and irrelevant. According to him, Glette was more interested in online sermons than real action. It was public humiliation. Soon, members had to pick sides. Some chapters stayed loyal to McGiffen. Others quietly dropped out or disappeared. A few sided with Glette, but his faction had little ground left to hold. The merger that once promised strength collapsed under the weight of pride, infighting, and two men who couldn't stop trying to outlead each other. In the end, it was two egos and no survivors. But McGiffen was unstoppable. By 2015, he was already thinking beyond the Sadistic Souls Aryan Nations MC. He was planning something bigger, a new alliance to unite some of the extreme hate groups in the country. It would bring together the Sadistic Souls, the United Clans of America, and the creativity movement under one banner, the Black and Silver Solution. McGiffen's goal was to create something too big to ignore. But before the merger could take full shape, Dennis Michael McGiffen was caught in a personal scandal that shook the core of the movement he was trying to lead. Just before a planned Black and Silver Solution conference in Scottsboro, Alabama, allegations of race mixing resurfaced. This time, the spotlight was on McGiffen, facing allegations that he had fathered a child with a non-white partner. In white supremacist circles, this was seen as a betrayal of racial purity and would have been considered outright treason under the original Aryan Nations leadership. The Black and Silver Solution was supposed to be a powerful alliance. McGiffen even promoted it as the true successor to Richard Butler's Aryan Nations. But the scandal only made things worse. Doubts grew about McGiffen's leadership, and the movement he spent years building began to fall apart. McGiffen's reputation was ruined overnight. The man who once preached loyalty and racial purity was now being laughed at and pushed away by the same people who used to follow him. And while everything was falling apart, his own half-brother came forward and spoke out. Jeff Hurst, McGiffen's half-brother, had stayed quiet for years, but now he spoke up, and he didn't hold back anything. He talks about purity, about pride, but he won't even claim his own kid. That baby didn't ask to be born mixed. Dennis made that choice, and now he hides behind leather and hate while his child grows up without a father. That's not strength, that's cowardice. This spread quickly through biker forums and underground radio shows. McGiffen stayed silent. And just like that, the loudest voice of the Sadistic Souls, the man who once dreamed of leading a new white empire, became the symbol of its biggest hypocrisy. After the scandal broke, the Black and Silver Solution didn't just fall apart. It tore itself apart from the inside. What started as hushed conversations in biker bars and online forums quickly turned into full-blown outrage. The whispers weren't just about McGiffen's actions anymore, they were about his entire legacy. His followers, many of whom had once treated his words like gospel, now questioned everything. How could the man who preached racial purity be tied to the very thing he condemned? In a movement obsessed with bloodlines, the news hit like a wrecking ball. For years, McGiffen had stood as a figure of authority, someone who demanded loyalty, discipline, and strict racial boundaries. But now, That image was cracked beyond repair. His own bloodline had become the movement's greatest embarrassment. McGiffen tried to spin the narrative. He downplayed the incident. He claimed it was a misunderstanding, a mistake from the past. But no excuse was enough. The contradiction was too obvious, the hypocrisy too large. And then the real collapse began. The people closest to McGiffen, the men who had worn the patch, defended the club, and bled for its cause, began walking away. They didn't just disagree, they felt betrayed. One of them was longtime member Dave Biquette. He didn't just leave the club, he lit a match on his way out. In an online post that quickly went viral within white nationalist circles, Biquette wrote, "You've lied to your club brothers about having anything to do with your son who has a racial slur child. You said it was a one-night stand, but it was a year-long relationship. He has a custody agreement, pays child support, and still sees this child. Do you remember Christmas at the clubhouse, Dennis? The year your grandchild came to see Santa?" McGiffen didn't deny it. Instead, he revoked Biquette's membership and issued a statement. "It was an Indian, which is no better to me. He was 15. At 16, it was over. He pays child support because the courts make him. I ain't never with that kid." The message was blunt, angry, and only added fuel to the fire. To many within the movement, it wasn't a defense. It was an admission. But things didn't stop there. McGiffen's own half-brother, Jeff Hurst, stepped into the spotlight. For years, Hurst had remained mostly in the background, quiet, observing. But now he jumped straight into the firestorm, posting online. "The truth hurts, don't it, Denny? You can tell anybody the lies, but I'm your brother. I know the real truth, don't I? And you don't want everybody else finding out what's really going on." By now, the scandal wasn't just about one child. It had grown into something bigger. It was about a leader who had broken the very code he expected everyone else to live by. The man who once stood for purity, loyalty, and hard-line beliefs now appeared to be a hypocrite to the movement he claimed to lead. And the damage didn't stop at family drama or online feuds. At the same time, McGiffen made another bold and highly controversial decision. He shifted the club's stance on religion. Traditionally, groups like Aryan Nations followed Christian identity, a fringe, deeply racist theology that claimed white people were God's chosen race. It wasn't just belief, it was doctrine. Non-Christians, in their view, didn't belong. It was a foundational pillar of their ideology. But McGiffen was changing that. In an attempt to widen the reach of the Sadistic Souls, he opened the doors to white supremacists from other religious backgrounds, even those who didn't follow Christianity at all. Odinists, creators, National Socialists, pagan white nationalists. All were now welcome, so long as they upheld the core racial ideals. On the club's website, the new policy was laid out clearly. Religion cannot control the destiny of our folk. To be part of Aryan Nations SSMC, you may be identity, Christian separatist, creator, Odinist, or plain NS National Socialist. We will not turn good brothers down due to theological issues. To McGiffen, this was a step toward unity, but to others, it was betrayal. The creativity movement pulled out. The United Clans of America cut ties. Even inside the Sadistic Souls, chapters began dropping his name from websites or quietly shutting down. The Black and Silver Solution, a dream of uniting hate groups under one flag, was dead. Once again, the Sadistic Souls MC stood alone. No more coalitions, no more Aryan Nations, no more Black and Silver Solution. Just Dennis McGiffen, and whoever was still willing to ride beside him. Over the next 6 years, the club went through a whirlwind of change. Chapters opened and vanished. Core members walked away. At one point, the club nearly dissolved altogether during a quiet but heavy mass exodus. It could have been the end, but McGiffen didn't fold. Instead, he circled the wagons. He shrank the inner circle, rewrote the rules, and refocused his vision. The club stayed whites only. That never changed. But when it came to religion, he shifted gears. Strict Christian identity was out. Flexibility was in. Now, Sadistic Souls would welcome any white nationalist, regardless of faith, as long as they supported the cause. To critics, it looked like desperation. To loyalists, it meant McGiffen still had gas left in the tank. He didn't rebuild an empire, but he didn't vanish either. Today, according to the group's website, Sadistic Souls MC remains active and recruiting. They claim chapters not just across the US, but also in Australia, England, New Zealand, South Africa, France, Germany, Ireland, and Canada. They still promote white nationalist ideology, using the imagery and structure of outlaw biker culture as their shield. And Dennis Michael McGiffen, he's still wearing the patch. Still riding, still chasing a legacy, one that continues to slip further out of reach.